Good morning and welcome to the Building Podcast. Today we're exploring one of the largest drivers for change within our industry, the client and their funders. Today, I want to look at the reasons why clients are now specifying renewable technology and low carbon materials within their projects. I'm interested to find out whether the commitment to ESG or environment, social and governance issues is a high priority or just a nice to have. I'm really pleased to be able to welcome Chris Kimber-Nickelson to the Building Podcast. Chris is the Commercial Development Director for MEPC, a long-standing and significant property investor and owner. MEPC is also part of Federated Hermes, which is an international investor. Now, Chris is the ideal person to guide us on this discussion, as MEPC have three value streams. They aim to unlock finance, of course, but also social and environmental issues. Chris, welcome to the Building Podcast.
Good morning, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. Chris, we normally start off by you sort of giving yourself a little plug by saying who you are and what you do, and it allows sort of the listeners to get some context.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Well, as you say, I'm Chris Kimber-Nickelson. I'm Commercial Director for Silverstone Park. That's my prime role in the MEPC business, but I also have a development that we're progressing down in Bristol, a site called St Mary Le Port, which is a particularly interesting and challenging city centre site right in the heart of Bristol, making use of what's become a redundant set of 1960s, 70s concrete buildings. We're hoping to redevelop those over the next couple of years. And then my final role is as Development Director for Milton Park, which is our largest single ownership asset in the portfolio in South Oxfordshire, which is a mixed-use park, but predominantly and more so becoming handed over to life science companies. So there's a lot of laboratories on that, as well as offices and some remaining industrial buildings. So that's my role. It's quite wide and varied, and I guess that's what keeps me interested.
Well, and certainly for the benefit of most of our listeners on here who are within the supply chain of people and organisations that you like, similar to the ones you represent, really important to understand what the drivers are and what really you're looking for in this changing world of sustainability and carbon.
Yeah, as you say, is ESG important to the investors? Yes, it is. Is the short answer. It's hugely important. If we do not create sustainable built environment, it won't be there for our investors to gain a return from. So it's not an entirely altruistic position for them to take. They have to do this in order that, because of changing government legislation and global demand for reduction in carbon, everybody knows, I think it's fair to say that, we got a climate problem and we're all responsible for doing something about it. And our investors are clever enough to know that if we do something now, that will keep our real estate relevant going forward. Otherwise, we'd be ploughing money into buildings that in maybe 10 or 15 years' time become irrelevant and therefore don't generate any income. So, like I say, it's not entirely altruistic. They're doing it for their own benefit, but of course, it has the knock-on benefits to everybody else.
Yes. So, I mean, Chris, it sounds like you're taking a sort of a global perspective on it, so that the large investors around the world are taking a global perspective to it, because we need to reduce carbon across the world rather than just focusing on the single projects.
Yeah, our investors are not just UK based. We have relationships with CPPIB, the Canadian Pension Plan, which is the state pension plan for Canada. They're hugely driven. Probably also because of requirements from effectively their owners, the Canadian government, to hit net zero targets. But there are other international investors. AusSuper, the Australian superannuation scheme, is also a client of ours. So all of these investors know how important it is to make sure that the real estate where they're putting pensioners' money is safe for the long term. That's really it. And then it leads on to the other bit. So that's the environmental bit. That's the carbon bit, if you like.
Yeah.
And we do a lot on that. We measure the embodied carbon, and we try and predict the carbon in use of buildings. And now we're at the point where we're measuring the carbon in use on the latest phase of our building program to see whether our estimates are accurate or not. And if they're not, then we need to go back to the drawing board and have another go. But that's the carbon piece. But you've also got the social and governance piece of the ESG.
Yeah.
And that's to do with us being successful, really. And if we can be socially conscious and aware of our impacts on the societies in which our buildings exist, then that means that we attract tenants.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need to do. We don't build buildings for ourselves. We build them to lease to other people.
Yeah.
So we need to, when we've built those buildings, we need to find tenants for them. And the way we do that is to make it a good place. And effectively, that's what the social bit of ESG is. You're doing good things to make a good place. And that's what attracts tenants in. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. And we employ lots of different methods. But if it's a good place and you attract a good tenant, then that tenant is also hopefully going to be on board with that idea, and their success leads to our success. They'll want a bigger building. They'll want 2 buildings. They'll want to expand the campus. So it's a virtuous spiral that you need to get on and kickstart, and we're able to do that because of the funding, the type of funding that we have, which is what's in the industry referred to as long-term patient capital. Pension fund money doesn't need to see an immediate return because it's paying out over a long period of time. So it can afford to invest. So we can very often be the sort of kickstart to an area, a place, a development that enables others then to join us and hopefully create something that's positive for everyone that's in that place and around that place, that immediately touches that place. So that's the social bit of it as well. And our, that's, again, it's for the benefit of our investors to do that.
Yeah. I mean, Chris, that, investors like MEPC have always been interested in place, haven't they? I mean, that's key. That's been key to selling ever since MEPC was invented 75 years ago.
Yeah, we see ourselves as placemakers.
Yeah.
That's what we've done at Silverstone. We've been here for 12 years now. Yes, it was clearly a place before we were involved. There was a racetrack here. Not many people would have known that there were a few business units here. What we've got now, I think, is it's fair to say an internationally recognised business community that we're able to really invest in and grow now over the next 10 years. We've still got a while to go, and obviously we're restricted to a degree by the market. The level of demand out there in the market, and that's been difficult over the last couple of years. Because of the global position. It's not just the UK that's had it tough. Clearly other places have as well, and the States being one of them, and that's obviously why they've decided to go in a direction that they've gone in with Donald Trump. And will continue to be affected by global activities, the war in Ukraine, the situation in America. Whatever the views of the Chinese are, they play an impact because our investors are international. They can choose to put their money anywhere in the world.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we have to make ourselves an attractive proposition. So we have to be at the forefront of ESG because it's important to the investors. So we have to know what we're talking about and be able to walk the talk as well.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing for me, Chris, is how you then value that carbon element. I get the social bit, and I think that hasn't really changed. But tracking embodied carbon and operational carbon is a really modern and leading edge thing to be doing.
It's an emerging specialty, definitely. We use a particular consultancy across the UK portfolio, and we do that for a couple of reasons. One is we picked that particular firm because they had a really good library of data on the embodied carbon in building materials,
Right.
and can demonstrate that they could apply that well to our projects. Because if you don't know, if you haven't got the base data for what is the embodied carbon in a square meter of brickwork, you know, you can't really start the exercise. So this particular firm have got a really good library of data that continues to grow, because you know, we're always using different specifications, different materials, and you know, they're configured in different ways, as you'll know. So that's one reason we pick them, and the other is obviously consistency. So we need to be comparing apples with apples across the portfolio. If we use different firms, they might do things in different ways or have a different figure for a square meter of brickwork, you know, and that's going to give us skewed results, or results that are difficult to understand. So we use the same firm, but it's not an easy task, because materials are constantly changing. You know, manufacturers have changed the recipes, and you know, you have to update your figures, and you know, the ways of putting things together, and then the regs change. Obviously there's a lot of change with fire regulations at the moment, which means we're, you know, adding stuff in probably. So it's not an easy task measuring embodied carbon, but I believe we have a really good go at it. And at least we're doing the same thing on all our buildings, so it gives us some sort of method of measuring it.
And Chris, do you make design decisions based on embodied carbon or in the operational carbon in use?
Yeah, definitely. So we've just done a project down at Milton Park, which are some small high-tech industrial units. So they're sort of not incubator units, but they're the sort of mid-sized units that a firm might go into once their business starts to grow. And we've built those using glulam timber frame, rather than steelwork. Now, this is one of the things that keeps changing, because you can get steel manufactured. Sometimes you can get steel manufactured with a very high recycle content. So there's a lot of reuse steel in the steel that you're buying, up to 85%. Now that's great, because somebody else has already technically taken the hit on the carbon on the steel. So the steel that you're buying is quite low carbon embodied energy, technically. There's lots of arguments around taking that point of view, but I think that's the reasonable approach to take. But you can't always get steel with a very high recycled content, because it's not available. Whereas we can get glulam timber, and that has, you know, a significant reduction in the embodied carbon figure. So I can't remember the exact figures, but it's about a 25% reduction on the project as a whole by using glulam. So it's good, but it's not perfect, you know. And we're having to buy glulam timber frames that are shipped from Austria, which, you know, is counter to, you know, there is a way you could save more carbon by not having that transportation cost, but they're still lower carbon than buying steel in the UK.
I find it's a fascinating conversation, because I interviewed Tata's steel, the guy responsible for selling steel in the UK, and you know, they can see reducing the embodied carbon in a ton of steel from over 2,000 tons down to 200 to 300 kilograms per ton. But that requires their electric furnace, arc furnaces to be replaced in Port Talbot, and to be only using that recycled steel, so they can, as I say, that's already had its carbon,
and probably using some renewable energy to fire the furnace, etc. So it's all these things are constantly changing and evolving. But we will make design decisions. You know, we run the consultancy that we use will run a draft embodied carbon target process, and they'll come back to us and they'll say, these elements of the building, the windows or roof cladding or whatever it might be, are bumping up the level of embodied carbon, we should consider using something different in these areas, and we will. We'll change it. If there's something available.
Are you then specifying that granular detail about what you require? So you take those glulam beams as MEPC. Are you specifying glulam from Austria as part of that calculation?
Not necessarily. We wouldn't necessarily go to that level, but we work with our supply chain partners. So yes, on that particular job, we would have spoken to our preferred main contractor about where they were going to source their glulam, and we would need to then speak to the manufacturer about their carbon figures for that glulam. We don't necessarily have to do that, but in that particular example, that's what we did, and I think it's more likely that we will continue to do more of that sort of thing as we go forward. We've got to work with a supply chain. Clearly, we don't go out and buy all the materials directly for building a building. We have to work with our supply chain partners, and there are some easy wins at the moment, and there are some less easy wins. So raised access flooring, as you'll be aware, you could easily get hold of second-hand raised access flooring or refurbished raised access flooring until everybody realised that, and now you can't get hold of any refurbished. But that will spin round the circle, won't it? And come back again, and we'll be buying it on a more regular basis, and they'll be remanufacturing it on a more regular basis. So. But the whole industry is involved and going through this process of change. So it's a difficult thing to put a finger on, and there's no technical right answer.
Right. Are you keeping are you holding your supply chain to account for the carbon they produce? Is that a sort of contractual specification for so many kilograms a square meter, or
so we give targets? Yeah, so we haven't got to the point where we're contractually penalising anybody, but we have targets that we work with the supply chain together on, and recording at the moment. Recording of the data is the big thing, getting good quality data, because as I mentioned earlier, we need that good quality data because it doesn't exist at the moment. So that's the priority going forward. You're right. I think. What we'll find is you will see carbon targets written into specifications that are contractually binding, but I don't think that that really exists at the moment.
The challenge is in recording it and measuring it, isn't it? And that's
and everybody has to be happy that the systems that are being used, can't be cheated or scammed, and they're all the same. Again, level playing field. We all know what we're talking about when we give a target. What does that actually mean? So
and key is actually the operational carbon. I'm really pleased to hear you're measuring your operational carbon. I mean, that's often significantly more over the life of the building than the embodied carbon, depending on the embodied type of building you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big hit at the beginning, but it pales into insignificance, like you say, over 10, 20, well, certainly 30, 40, 50 years of a life of a building. We're trying to get that down, and we're following the Neighbours scheme. If you're aware of the Neighbours, it's originally an Australian measurement system for collating data on carbon in use, and that's what's being used at our buildings in Leeds and Manchester. The part of the pioneer study for Neighbours in the UK, and going back in and measuring the actual use of electricity, and that's a challenging thing because we're not in charge of the spaces; they're let to tenants. So we have to work closely with tenants and get them on board and ask to see their electricity use data and that sort of thing in different areas, and some are happy to do that and join the cause, and some are more protective about what they see as things that are commercially sensitive. Whether that's accurate or not, I don't know. But
that's their prerogative, isn't it?
That's their prerogative. So it's it's a challenging task, but we've got to do it to see whether what we're saying on paper or what our engineers are telling us on paper is reflected in real life. Are we better or are we worse? At the moment, I don't know the answer.
Yeah. But presumably you're doing it, Chris, because that's a key selling point for your customers on your completed buildings. You'll be able to say
It
the
can be,
operational
yeah.
carbon is going to be X.
Yeah,
And
we can say, your bills, operational carbon is at the end of the day turns into an electricity bill.
Absolutely.
So we can say your bills will be 50% cheaper if
Yeah.
we're at a point that the data is strong enough to prove that.
Yeah. Slightly different question. I mean, coming back to the development work that you're controlling, are you putting a price on carbon? Do you have a sort of a nominal price per ton of carbon that you work to in your financial equations to say, well, it's
We
worth
do.
doing?
Yeah, we do. So the way we present things at the moment is on the embodied carbon calculation, we give our investors an offset figure. So there's we calculate what we think the estimated amount of carbon is, and then apply a rate to that to give an offset figure. So it maybe we'll say in a board report when we go for an approval of a scheme, we'll say something like the embodied carbon is estimated to be X, and if the investors wish to offset this, then they'll need to invest X amount of money to offset that carbon. Yeah, and they can. We don't run any. We're not involved with any particular offset schemes, but our investors are, so they can then go away and decide whether they want to take money out of one particular asset and move it into an offset scheme that they're probably already involved with.
Yeah. I mean, but when you're doing sort of comparables on materials in a building, so you talked about the glulam beams versus steel. Do you have a sort of figure in mind for what that embodied carbon might be worth as a sort of on cost from the steel compared to the glulam?
Yeah. Again, that's run through an appraisal, a financial appraisal. So if we think the glulam is going to cost X percent more than the steel, then obviously we have to come up with, it still has to be financially viable.
Yeah.
Within the bounds of the project.
Brilliant.
So we can present a number of options to our investors and say we think that we should do this because it reduces the embodied carbon and therefore the offset is X. But if you don't want to spend the capital on the scheme, you could have the frame built for 25% less. But your offset will be Y.
So it'd be greater. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not actually. I mean, I'd be interested to know what their sort of values were for some of your
I can't tell you off the top of my head. I'd have
but it is.
Look them up. But yeah.
The EU's been pushing for 120 euros a ton of carbon, and obviously in the voluntary markets at the moment, we're anywhere between sort of 40 up to 80 at the moment.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you what figures we're using off the top of my head.
No, but it soon adds up to an awful lot of money, and that's the interesting thing for me is that that's significant decisions to make.
The embodied carbon in a development is going to be worth hundreds of thousands of pounds in terms of offset. Yeah.
So just moving on a bit then, one of the things which you and I have talked about before is renewable generation on site and retrofitting generation. Clearly comes with some risks and clearly comes with some opportunities. What's sort of the investment, your investors and your owners' attitude to those sort of risks and rewards?
Yeah, I think historically it's been quite mixed. I think they've seen it as on the periphery of real estate and not part of the real estate remit. Something that sits to the side. Probably in an investor world, historically, it's lived in what we would call probably the infrastructure box. And clearly our clients are fairly large global investors, so they do invest in things like PV farms and wind farms and bridges and other infrastructure around the place. And they would sort of take it to one side and not see it, anything that related to PVs on roofs of real estate, etc., would be seen as a bit of an aside, if you like, and a management headache that's probably not worth the bother. But that attitude, I think, is changing, has changed.
Right.
Probably it's fair to say. And so, yes, we are being tasked with looking at how we can generate initiatives on the real estate. You're right, quite right with what you say. There are lots of opportunities. Clearly, we've got a lot of roof space in the UK across our portfolio.
Yeah.
Could it? It's all. I think it's fair to say it's probably all designed to take the weight of PV panels because they're not that heavy.
No.
You know, and there is a at the moment probably a lost opportunity in terms of getting that generation. There are, again, as you say, some technical and legal issues to overcome in terms of the leasing and rights to roof space and ongoing maintenance of roof space and liabilities associated with nailing things to roofs. But they can be overcome if one has the will to do that, again, in liaison with tenants potentially. We also have some land and some spaces that could be used for different things, whether that's wind or battery storage or so we are now, I think, only probably in the last year or so beginning to look very seriously at how we apply those solutions to the portfolios that we've got. And that's something that we'll have to wait and see what that looks like. I think it could look like a number of different things in a number of different places, but I think the investors are keen. They probably can now see the technologies come on as well, of course, so the returns are a bit quicker. They're not you're not quite looking at 10-year paybacks, you're looking at more like a 5-year payback now, which becomes much more attractive to them. So they're now thinking about whether, actually we could put some of our real estate money into these things and get a return that bolsters the real estate, and it makes us look good in ESG terms. So I think yeah, definitely over the coming months and years, we're going to see a lot more activity on that front.
Brilliant. I mean, I'm on the solar task force, and one of the big challenges that we've been given by owners of the large warehouses and roof spaces around the UK is exactly what you've just described. It's owned by one person, it's funded by another person, it's operated by a third person, it's maintained by a fourth or fifth or sixth person. And I think in the worst case scenario, there was over 10 separate legal companies we're going to have to get involved in sorting out a lease to the building.
It is not as straightforward as one would hope. And they used to, and if you want to feed it back into the grid and it's over a certain amount, that effectively you're becoming an energy generation entity, and then there's lots of rules and regulations around that sort of thing, which is what happened at our King's Cross development. Effectively, I mean, that was a big enough development and a wealthy enough development, being in central London, that it made it worthwhile setting up an energy company to deal with the renewable energies. But that's not always the case, and you don't really want to do that on every site around the UK. We don't want to be, and our investors don't want to be, energy companies.
No,
we want to do the right thing, but we don't want to get tied up with a load of red tape, around the issuing of bills and all that sort of thing. So
no, and that can be passed through to the operators, and
it can. It's a complex context, isn't it, for how it all fits together, and we haven't historically done it, so it's new to us, so we've got to feel our way through all of that.
I mean, many people would think there's an investment opportunity, particularly around smart grids on some of your larger schemes, to be able to
I would think so, and we are investigating one of those at the moment. So
brilliant. Just I mean, taking the conversation on a bit, so the one of the challenges I think we have, or is perceived to be having in the industry, is selling new technology to funders. And as you say, just from the conversation we've had so far, we can see that you're looking at all sorts of different things. And I would have thought putting glulam beams into an industrial commercial facility 10 years ago would have been unheard of. And now to hear that you're doing it to MEPC is great news. What's the best way the industry needs to sell new technology to people like you? What are sort of the metrics you would use to see if it's acceptable?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because investors like track record.
Absolutely.
That's it. And you know, putting glulam beams in a industrial commercial building was not an easy task. The investors were sort of on board with it. I think they were less concerned, but the insurers were a difficult hurdle to get over. So you know, all new technology, and I think the investors are probably slightly more open-minded to things, but they do like to know that, you know, whatever it is isn't going to go wrong every 5 years and have to be replaced. And that's difficult to get that level of track record, isn't it? So that's interesting. Insurers are a problem with new technology. They're giving us headaches with electric batteries in cars and bicycles, and how we store those. And I believe there's plenty of data out there that proves that all these things are actually probably much more safe than, you know, combustion engine vehicles. But there are some high-profile examples of electric things causing a problem. So I think it's a challenge. I don't know how you answer that other than by, you know, demonstrating a track record, either of safety or you know, low maintenance, or you know, I think that's the only way you can convince people. You know, here's one. It's been running for 5 years. We only come out once a month and polish it. You know.
Okay, so that note to self, then we've got to make sure that the industry is be able to demonstrate that track record. And I mean, as a investor stroke client, are you presuming you're passing the risk for that success of that down to your supply chain? So if supply chain said, I want to use this newfangled gadget and it's got 5 years track record, you'll be looking to pass the risk of that to the supply chain?
We ideally, if we can, you know, make it somebody else's problem, then that's good. That helps definitely. But you know, everybody needs to cover themselves in one shape or form, and that makes it less commercially attractive, doesn't it? So generally, what in real estate as an investment class, that, you know, it is a class that carries some risk. You know, so it by definition, it's riskier than buying government gilts. For example. So there is an acceptance and a willingness with the investors and the people that work in real estate that we will take on a certain level of risk, and everyone is aware that the more risk you take on, the more reward you can potentially have. So it's a balance. You know, I think everything is going to be looked at, and everything is scrutinized in detail, basically. You know, each and everything we do is scrutinized at a number of levels. You know, it's not, I don't just go along and go, I've got a really good idea, we're just going to buy 10 of those, whatever they are. You know, that would be highly unusual, and it would, you know, that has to go through a set of approvals. You know?
I mean, it makes it quite challenging. I mean, on two fronts, really. I mean, I think a lot of, you know, because you've got finance and you've got social and governance in your mix, you know, a lot of these decisions you're going to take are actually fairly subjective.
And that's really difficult, because if you're talking to an investor who's sat in front of a spreadsheet, how do we apply a numeric value to, you know, the possibility that we're improving the area and therefore we might get some tenants quicker? That's quite a difficult one. But they will take a subjective argument, but only so far. That's the problem.
Well, that's your job, isn't it?
That's our job, is to try and make those cases.
Brilliant. And the other challenge I see is that if the construction industry is hugely fragmented, and you'll be placing a contract at Topco at the top level, and there might be 6, 7, 8 layers of supply chain below you, and some of that innovation is going to be down the bottom of that supply chain. That granular innovation is going to be down the bottom, and trying to get that subjective decision up the supply chain onto your table, onto your desk, is a real challenge to many of us.
I to be honest, I don't really know what you can do about that. that's the way the industry has been pushed over the years to split into layers of subcontract chains and
Yep.
supplier chains. You don't have, as you know, you don't have big companies that own everything down to the manufacturing. It's just that model is just not there. I guess all you can do again is probably about track record. Shout as loud as you can about the fact that you're the leaders, you've got the best track record, you're working with the 5 biggest contractors, and just get your name out there, I guess, and your product out there, and make it clear that what the benefits are. But I've got no magic wand for the state of the industry, I'm afraid.
I'm sure if you had, Chris, you would have waved it a long time before now.
Well, I think what we do on our part is we try and work collaboratively with people. We try and be part of doing this podcast is to be open and honest and transparent about what we do. That's what we try and do. We can't give projects, jobs, orders to everybody in the world. We've only got so much work. We try and do our job properly by investigating all the options that are out there.
Yeah.
And that's all we can do, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very exciting on because I think it's, by doing those investigations, an organization your size is going to drive that carbon awareness down the supply chain. So, that's, if you're a main contractor working for you, you need your supply chain to come up with what their embodied carbon is within their products, and that's going to affect everybody. We're going to have to do that, and particularly if you can standardize it, it's going to make life a lot easier for the industry to be able to respond to those challenges with a consistent and clearly understood or defined story to tell about carbon. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, but there's lots of different clients out there. We try and be a responsible client. Other clients will just go, what's the lowest price? Their drivers are different. So, but for larger clients and government clients and local authority clients, I think there is a responsibility there for them to be dealing with things in a slightly different manner and be searching for these solutions and ensuring they're getting the right answers.
Yeah. Are you working with other big investors to come up with a consistent position, or is this a sort of?
No, I think we're happy to sign up to what the industry, deems to be the standard. So, I think we've just confirmed that, for when we say a building is going to be net zero in operation, I think we've just confirmed which definition. Good. Again, I can't remember what it is, but we've confirmed which one we're signing up to.
Yep.
We've literally just published our latest annual ESG report, which is an interesting read, and I'll send you a copy. But in there it says, we are taking, I can't remember, the UK Green Building Council or another one, their definition of net zero in operation. So we will abide by that.
Yeah.
So we can't do all these things on our own. Frankly, we are a commercial organisation. We are trying to get a return for the pensioners of the funds that we represent, and we are only so many people. We're not a huge organisation. We're quite lean, so we're happy to work with and rely on others and the industry in general to hopefully find a way through for us all.
Yeah. Well, and on that, I'm impressed with the granularity you hit the initial design on some of the key aspects. You'll be aware of the Building Safety Act for asking for the golden thread and making and bringing design decisions right up to the front, so that we're meant to now get onto site with a full design, making design, well, probably more design and dump, passing that risk down the supply chain with stuff you've already designed. But actually, you should have a very clear understanding, and that must help the renewables and the embodied carbon calculations that you're doing.
Yeah, I don't think we've really seen that yet, because we're just getting to grips with the Building Safety Act and the golden thread. I think that is probably coming through in this latest iteration of buildings that we're doing.
Yeah,
and we will see that. We've always, I don't think we've ever followed a develop and dump as you describe it,
Yeah.
procurement method. We've always taken our designs probably a little bit further than maybe some of our competitors,
Yeah.
because we like to have control of the quality of the building,
Well,
and we know what we're trying to achieve. So it's not as big a sea change as perhaps others are
yeah.
having to deal with. But yeah, I think you're right in what you say. The design will develop quicker, earlier, and that enables us to have more influence on it, and hopefully get it right before it gets to site, and
Yeah.
hopefully make sure we've got the best in there, not ending up with something that's second best because we didn't realise because we hadn't looked at it.
Brilliant. Chris, I'm aware of time. We've had a really good canter through, all things carbon and sustainability from a volume and sizable investor, and I think it's really interesting for most of our readers and listeners as to how your views have been changing over the last decade or so to pick the ESG elements up far more earnestly. If you had any asks for your supply chain, what would you like? How would you like your supply chain to respond better to the challenges you're currently facing?
That's an interesting one. I think back to your point really about the depth of the supply chain. I think at the bottom of the supply chain, the real innovators, the people who are having things made, making their own new things, they're probably pretty well advanced. There's probably a bit of a gap between us and them with tier 1, tier 2 contractors, Topco, as you referred to them earlier. And I think they really need to be coming to us with solutions. So that would help us.
Okay.
That would save us time. And they've got the ability to go down the supply chain. That's what they do. It's their supply chain. Yes, it's our supply chain as well, but they're in that supply chain. They need to go down there, fish around, come out with some good ideas, and then push them up towards us and say, look, you should appoint us for this scheme because we've got an in with this really good company that does X, Y, and Z widgets that will save 10% on the electric bill, or whatever it is. And I think that they need to be brought along. I think the contractors don't necessarily do enough work in the field of, they wait to be given a design. They wait. They're not doing enough research themselves.
Yeah. Okay. So to finish off with, that's a plea for an innovative developer who's changed the way they're looking at and things, saying, I need a supply chain that's innovative.
Yeah. That's a good summation. Yeah.
So very fair. Chris, it's an absolute pleasure talking to you. There's all sorts of things that we could carry on with, I'm sure, but it's been a lovely canter. Thank you very much, and I think it's been very informative for those that we can get through to about the way life's changing, and it's going to affect us all. I mean, people in your position are going to inform the industry, and we will have to take notice. So thank you very much.
No, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, Mark. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Thank you.